morning sunlight spilled through the vast glass walls of Ethan Trumpson's office, bathing everything in a golden glow. From the 72nd floor, the city stretched endlessly beneath him, a sprawling jungle of steel and ambition. Every skyscraper shimmered like a trophy, every reflection whispering of wealth and success. Yet as Ethan stood before that breathtaking view, something inside him felt strangely hollow. The silence of the room pressed against his chest like invisible weight. His assistant Clara walked in briskly, holding a folder of blueprints. "Sir, these are the final designs for the new tower in Dubai," she said, her voice crisp and efficient. But Ethan didn't turn to take them. He kept staring out the window, eyes tracing the sunlight dancing off other buildings. Finally, he said quietly, "No towers today, Clara." She blinked, uncertain if she had heard correctly. "Sir?" Ethan turned then, his expression unreadable. "No towers today," he repeated, a faint sigh beneath his words. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like signing another deal, building another monument with his name carved in marble. He waved her away gently, and Clara, confused, retreated without another word. He sat down, running a hand through his silvering hair, and looked at the city below, not as a conqueror, but as a man suddenly unsure of what he had conquered. Down there he saw lives moving, intersecting, rushing towards something unseen. A young boy was pushing a cart of coffee cups through the crowd, smiling despite the chaos. His shirt was too big, his shoes worn thin, but there was a fire in his step, a kind of joy Ethan couldn't remember feeling. That image stayed with him long after he turned from the window. His phone buzzed, investors, meetings, decisions, but he let it ring. For once he didn't care about profit margins or architectural records. Something deeper was stirring. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan left his penthouse and wandered the streets alone. The city that had always seemed loud now felt strangely intimate. He walked past restaurants, neon signs, street performers, every face glowing with life, every sound echoing something he had forgotten. When he passed a small rundown building, with flickering lights, he paused. A hand-painted sign read, "Community Learning Center." Through the cracked window he saw children laughing, painting colorful cardboard shapes. One little girl held up a crooked paper tower, beaming with pride. Ethan smiled faintly. "They're building towers," he whispered to himself, "but maybe they're really building dreams." For the first time in years, his heart softened. The night breeze carried laughter down the street, and Ethan Trumpson, the man who built empires, felt a quiet, unfamiliar peace. He didn't yet know it, but that moment would change everything. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing once again in front of that small community center. The sun was still climbing over the buildings, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The center looked even smaller in daylight, its paint peeling, windows fogged with dust, the sign barely hanging on one hinge. Yet from inside came the sound of children laughing, a melody more genuine than anything he'd heard in his marble office. He hesitated at the door, unsure why he'd come. A woman in her 60s opened it before he could knock. Her hair was streaked with silver, her eyes bright and sharp. "We're not open for visitors till 9, she said, then looked at him again, curious. Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm not here for a visit. Just to see what you do here." The woman tilted her head. "You can come in, but if you're selling something, you'll leave disappointed. We already have everything we need." Her tone was half warning, half warmth. "I'm Maria," she added as she turned and led him inside. The air smelled of paint and old paper. The walls were covered in colorful drawings, wobbly houses, smiling suns, stick figure families. Children sat at tables with crayons, scissors, and cardboard. They looked up as Ethan entered, some shy, some curious. "Kids," Maria said, "this is Mr. Ethan. He's here to see your dreams." A small boy with messy hair ran up to him, holding a crooked cardboard building. "This one's mine. It's got rooms for everyone, even people who don't have homes," he said proudly. Ethan crouched down, his suit creasing as he took the model in his hands. It was fragile, uneven, but filled with imagination. "That's beautiful," he said softly, and for a moment the boy's smile felt like sunlight. He walked around asking questions, listening to their wild ideas. Flying libraries, underwater schools, floating cities powered by laughter. These were not blueprints for profit, but dreams shaped by innocence. Maria stood beside him watching. "They come here after school," she explained. "Some of them don't have much at home. So we give them a place to create, to believe they can make something." Ethan nodded slowly. "You teach them architecture?" Maria laughed. "No, we teach them hope. Architecture is just the excuse." He left a check on her desk before leaving, signing it simply with an alias. But the next day he returned again. Without a check, without his bodyguards, just himself. He helped the children cut shapes, tape roofs, sketch impossible ideas. They didn't know who he was, and he liked it that way. At the end of the week, a little girl tugged his sleeve. "Mr. Ethan," she said softly, "when I grow up, I want to build something real, something that makes people happy." He smiled, his eyes glistening. "You already are," he whispered. That night, for the first time in decades, Ethan Trumpson didn't dream of towers reaching the sky. He dreamt of children reaching their dreams. Months passed, and the rhythm of Ethan's life had changed in ways even he hadn't anticipated. The boardrooms, the contracts, the endless calls from investors, all faded into the background, replaced by mornings filled with laughter, crayons, and the scratch of pencils on cardboard. He arrived at the community center early each day, sometimes before the children, and stayed late long after the echoes of their footsteps had faded down the hall. It was exhausting in a different way than running a corporation, but it left him awake, alive, and quietly happy in a manner money could never buy. The children had grown to expect him, not as a celebrity, but as a teacher and friend. He guided them through projects that seemed impossible. A school powered entirely by recycled materials, a park designed to float on water, a miniature city where every building had a story. Each child approached him with pride, eager to show their latest creation. "Look, Mr. Ethan, this one is for kids who have nowhere to play," one boy said, holding up a cardboard playground he had built from scraps. Ethan knelt beside him, tracing the lines gently with his fingers. "It's amazing," he said softly, and felt a surge of warmth in his chest. Outside the center, the world began to notice his absence. The media buzzed with speculation. Headlines screamed, "Trumpson empire falters," and "Where is the billionaire now?" Investors grew restless, and calls to his office went unanswered. Yet Ethan remained undisturbed. He was no longer chasing skyscrapers or stock prices. His empire was now intangible, made of ideas, laughter, and hope. One afternoon, Maria found him alone in the back room, sketching a new project. The children had left for the day, leaving the faint smell of paint and glue behind. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You've changed," she said quietly, watching his focus. Ethan didn't look up. "Maybe," he admitted. "I finally started building something real." Maria studied him, sensing the depth of his transformation. "The board will call," she said softly. "They don't understand why you've abandoned everything." He set his pencil down, stretching, his hand over the sketches. "They think empire is measured in towers, but real power, real legacy." He paused, eyes drifting to the light streaming through the dusty windows. "As measured in people, in dreams we help grow." The truth of it settled over him, like sunlight. He could feel it in the tired lines of his face and the quiet satisfaction of his heart. Here, in this modest, imperfect building surrounded by children whose spirits refused to be broken, he had found a purpose greater than any boardroom victory or architectural record. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's vision began to take shape. A foundation was forming, one that would fund education, art, and innovation for children who otherwise might never have a chance. He sketched late into the night, drafting not towers, but programs and workshops, scholarships and mentorships. And though the world questioned him, though the board muttered and investors panicked, Ethan felt a quiet certainty. The empire he was building now was one no one could take away, because it existed in hearts, not ledgers. That night, as he walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, Ethan Trumpson felt the first real peace he had known in decades. The skyscrapers behind him were still shining, but they no longer defined him. He had finally begun building dreams, not towers, and somehow that felt infinitely larger than any city skyline. By the time Ethan formally stepped away from his company, the city had grown used to the rumor of his absence. Reporters and gossip columns speculated endlessly. Trumpson abandons empire, and the billionaire who vanished. Yet Ethan walked past it all, indifferent. He no longer measured his life in headlines or stock prices. His mornings began at the community center, greeting children with a warm smile, guiding their hands as they constructed miniature worlds from scraps of cardboard, glue, and hope. The center had grown under his quiet influence. Crumbling walls were patched, classrooms brightened with paint, and old broken tables replaced with sturdy ones. But more than the physical improvements, the spirit of the place had changed. Children, who once hesitated to speak their ideas, now presented them boldly. They built towers, cities, and even fantastical machines, but each creation was grounded in compassion, ingenuity, and the desire to make someone else's life better. One particular afternoon stood out. Ethan had helped a group of teenagers design a library powered by recycled materials. Maria, standing beside him, watched as the kids debated over placement of tiny shelves and reading corners. "It's incredible," she whispered. "How much confidence they have now. They didn't have this before." Ethan smiled quietly. "They always had it. They just needed someone to believe in them," he replied, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the windows, a small ceremony began. The center had invited families and supporters to celebrate the launch of the Dream Builders Initiative, Ethan's new foundation. The children had prepared speeches and drawings, eager to show what they had learned. The little girl who had once drawn the crooked cardboard skyscraper now stood before the crowd, her hands trembling slightly. "When I was little," she began, "I thought towers made people great, but now I know it's people like Mr. Ethan who make dreams possible." Ethan watched from the back, his heart swelling. The applause that followed was thunderous, yet he remained quiet, letting the children's voices carry the weight of the moment. For the first time, he realized that the skyscrapers he had once built were nothing compared to the lives he was helping shape. Even as the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Ethan stayed behind, helping sweep up scraps of paper, arranging leftover crayons, and listening to the laughter of a few children who lingered. It was peaceful, grounding, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of boardrooms he had left behind. By the time he stepped outside into the fading twilight, he felt a sense of completeness he had never known in all his years of wealth and power. No newspaper headline, no investor call, no architectural record could match this satisfaction. His name would still be written on towers around the world, but the true legacy he had chosen to build was invisible to the naked eye, yet infinitely more enduring. A world of hope, possibility, and the courage to dream. As he walked down the quiet streets, the city skyline glittering behind him, Ethan Trumpson felt lighter than he had in decades. He had traded steel and glass for imagination and compassion, and in that trade, he had discovered something far greater than any empire. He had discovered purpose. Years had passed since Ethan Trumpson had walked away from his empire. The world still remembered his towers, their golden facades shining against the skyline, but he no longer looked at them with pride. He had found a different kind of satisfaction, one that no headline or fortune could provide. On this evening, he stood barefoot on a quiet beach, the waves lapping gently at his feet. The horizon stretched wide and unbroken before him. The air smelled of salt and freedom, a far cry from the steel and concrete of his former life. Maria arrived beside him, carrying a folded newspaper. They finally got the title right, she said with a soft laugh, handing it to him. The headline read, "The Man Who Built Dreams, Not Towers." Ethan took it in his hands, scanning the article about the foundation, the children's successes, and the ripple of hope he had sown across communities. He allowed himself a small smile. For once, the world had recognized something that mattered more than money or fame. "I never imagined this," he admitted, watching the sun dip lower, turning the waves to molten gold. That leaving everything behind could feel like coming home. Maria leaned on a driftwood log, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "You didn't just leave, Ethan, you transformed lives, and in doing so you became more than anyone ever expected." He chuckled softly, a sound that carried the weight of years and quiet joy. "I spent so long thinking legacy was about buildings, about leaving my mark in steel and glass. I never realized the real impact comes from helping others shape their dreams." He bent down, scooping up a handful of sand and letting it trickle through his fingers. Each grain seemed to represent a moment, a child, a hope fulfilled. The beach was empty except for them, the only sound the rhythmic crash of waves and the distant calls of seabirds. Ethan felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for decades. The skyscrapers still loomed behind him, distant and hollow, while ahead lay a vast open world filled with potential. He had built empires before, but this was different. The smiles of children, the spark in their eyes, the dreams they dared to imagine. This was the true measure of his life. He turned to Maria, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for believing in them and for believing in me when I forgot how to believe in anything at all." Maria smiled warmly. "It was never about me. It was always about helping you see what really matters." Ethan gazed at the horizon one last time as the sun disappeared beneath the waterline, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. In that moment, he felt a profound contentment, knowing that his name would be remembered not for towers, but for the countless dreams he had helped nurture. He whispered to the wind, "Maybe this is what heaven looks like, a world full of people who believed." And for the first time in his life, Ethan Trumpson felt entirely complete. He had traded the weight of wealth for the lightness of purpose, and in doing so, had finally built something that would last forever, not in steel but in the hearts of those who dared to dream.